The envelope hits the hardwood before I can say a word. Not dropped. Thrown. The way you throw something you've already decided is worthless. It lands face down near the leg of the dining table. The long mahogany one my father refinished himself in 1987. The one he's proud of. The one that seats 14 when all the leaves are in. Tonight there are 11 people around it, and every one of them is watching the envelope on the floor, and not one of them moves. My father's chair scrapes back. He doesn't look at me. He reaches for his wine glass instead, and the party, if you could still call it that, resumes around the silence the way water closes over a stone. The envelope stays on the floor for 47 minutes. I know because I counted. Welcome to Calm Revenge Tales. I'm glad you're here. This channel is about people who were counted out, written off, or thrown away, and the quiet, patient, permanent ways that story gets corrected. If that sounds like something you need right now, subscribe. Stay with me. Justice is slow, but it arrives. My name is Delphine Okafor-Marsh, and at the time of my parents' 35th wedding anniversary, I was 31 years old, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati, and working as a forensic accountant for a firm that handled estate disputes. I want you to understand what that job is. I spend my days finding money people thought was hidden. I follow paper trails through shell companies and amended tax returns and handshake deals that someone forgot to document. I am precise by profession and by temperament. I do not miss things. I had bought my apartment at 26 with a down payment I saved myself. I drove a 7-year-old Volvo I maintained on schedule. I cooked most of my own meals. Not because I had to, but because my grandmother Cecile had taught me that feeding yourself well was a form of self-respect that cost almost nothing if you knew what you were doing. Grandma Cecile. That's who this is really about. She was my father's mother, which made the math of how she was treated in that house a particular kind of complicated. She'd lived with my parents for 9 years by then, in the small bedroom off the kitchen that still had the original 1960s wallpaper. She was 78, sharp as she'd ever been, a little slower on stairs. She grew tomatoes on the back step and made pepper soup every Sunday and called me Del, in a way that meant something I can't fully translate. My mother tolerated her. My father, her own son, had decided somewhere around year 3 that Cecile was a burden, and that the most efficient way to manage that feeling was to make sure she knew it. I called Cecile every Tuesday and every Friday. I visited when I could. When I visited, I sat with her in the kitchen and we cooked together and she told me things. That was our arrangement. It worked. The invitation to the anniversary party arrived in late September, 6 weeks before the event. It was a printed card, which meant my mother Rosalind had gone to some trouble. 35th anniversaries don't have an official theme, but Rosalind had chosen coral and gold. And the card communicated this expectation without quite stating it as a requirement, which was very much her style. There was a note tucked inside in her handwriting. Smart casual. Nothing too casual. You know how your father gets. I didn't know how my father gets. There was a second note, shorter, which I've kept. Please don't bring up the property thing. We just want a nice evening. The property thing. My father had been managing Cecile's finances since she moved in, or rather, he had been managing her assets, which were more substantial than anyone seemed to realize, because Cecile had never talked about money the way the rest of the family did, which is to say loudly and with grievance. He'd had her sign documents. I'd asked to see them twice. Both times he said he'd send them. He never did. I went to the party anyway. I went because Cecile called me the week before, and she said, in that careful voice she used when she was choosing words slowly, Del, I want you there. I have a feeling things are going to shift soon, and I want to see your face. I asked her what she meant by shift. She said, come find out. I should tell you that Cecile had been a bookkeeper for 31 years before she retired. I should tell you that she taught herself to type at age 62. I should tell you that she had quietly, over the course of the previous 2 years, been corresponding with a lawyer named Augustine Ferre in Columbus, and that she had not mentioned this to anyone in the family except me, in fragments, in the kitchen, over pepper soup. I did not know the full picture yet. But I am a forensic accountant. I knew there was a picture. I arrived at 6:15. The house was full. My mother's sister Brenda was there with her husband Terrence. My brother Claude had flown in from Portland with his girlfriend. 3 couples from my parents' church. A neighbor named Philippa who brought a fruit tart, and spent the evening standing slightly too close to the buffet table. I found Cecile in the kitchen. She was stirring a pot of something that wasn't on the official menu. A small pot, set to the side for herself. Oatmeal with cardamom and dried apricot. That was her supper on evenings when the main table had food she couldn't manage with her back teeth. No one had mentioned this to the caterer. No one had arranged anything for her. She had simply, quietly, solved it herself. I sat on the counter the way I used to when I was 12. We talked about a bird she'd seen that morning. A cedar waxwing, she said, which is a bird I had to look up later because I didn't know what it looked like. She described it with the specific pleasure of someone who has learned to pay attention to small things, because small things were what she was given. Before I went to join the party, she pressed something into my hand. A plain white envelope, letter-sized, sealed. She'd written my name on the front in her careful, cramped cursive. "Don't open it here," she said. "You'll know when." I put it in my bag. That was the mystery object I carried for the next 6 weeks without understanding what it contained. The party was fine until the gift presentation. My mother had arranged a small ceremony. Guests gathered in the living room. Champagne poured. A brief speech by Claude who was charming and said nothing. Then the gifts. Then mine. I had found something I thought was meaningful. A framed photograph of my parents at their 5th anniversary party, 1994. A picture I'd sourced from a box in my grandmother's room. One she'd kept for 40 years. Behind it, in the frame, a handwritten note from Cecile about the day they got married, the dress Rosalind wore, how my father had cried and tried to hide it. I'd had the note transcribed and printed on archival paper. I'd spent 4 hours on this. It cost me $60 in materials, and an afternoon of my grandmother's stories. My father looked at it. Set it down. Looked at me. "This is it." I said it was. He said, "You couldn't have gotten them something real?" I started to explain. He picked up the frame, and then not in anger exactly, but in dismissal, which is worse, he placed it off the edge of the table and let it fall. It was Claude who flinched first. His girlfriend put her hand on his arm. Brenda looked at her champagne. Philippa the neighbor took a precise step backward. And for one moment her mouth opened, and then closed, and she did not say anything. My mother's expression was the one I'd seen my whole life. The careful arrangement of a face that has learned to show nothing at moments like this. Cecile was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. My father looked at her and said, "Mother, this isn't your party. You don't need to hover." She looked at me. Not with hurt. With something older and more resolved. I picked up the frame from the floor. I set it on the table. I said, quietly, so only the nearest 4 people heard, "That was unkind." My father said, "This is my house, Delphine." I said, "I know." Then I said, "Grandma, do you want to get your coat?" She got her coat. We left. I want to be clear. I did not storm out. I did not slam a door. I collected her cardamom oatmeal in a container she found in the 3rd drawer. We drove away in my 7-year-old Volvo with the heat on because October in Ohio runs cold. And Cecile sat in the passenger seat and said nothing for the first 12 minutes, and then she said, "You didn't have to do that." I said I knew that too. She said, "Good. That makes it mean something." She moved in with me the following week. The logistics were specific. Her bedroom set was too large for my second room, so we sold it and I bought a platform bed from a woman in Kenwood for $220. Cecile paid for her own groceries, insisted on it, slid exact cash across the kitchen counter every Sunday. I bought a second shelf unit for the bathroom and reorganized the whole linen situation. I learned that she could not sleep with the ceiling fan running, so I bought a standing fan for my own room and moved it out. I did not tell my father where she was for the first 3 days. When he called, I answered. He said she needed to come back. I said she was fine and comfortable, and had a plant on her windowsill she was already talking to in the mornings. He said, "You're doing this to punish me." I said, I'm doing this because she's my grandmother and she needed somewhere to go. He said if I kept this up I could forget about the holiday dinner. I said okay. It was a quiet winter. Cecile and I cooked on Sunday afternoons. She taught me her pepper soup, which is more complicated than it looks, involving 3 types of dried fish and a spice she called Yuta that I had to order online from a vendor in Maryland. We made it correctly for the first time in January, in the apartment that smelled of fish stock and warming spice. And Cecile tasted it from the wooden spoon and said it was right. That's the one, she said. Now you'll always have it. I kept the envelope in the drawer next to my bed. I did not open it. She had not told me to yet. My brother called in December. He said my parents were willing to have Cecile back if I would dial back the attitude. I said I didn't have an attitude, I had a grandmother living in my guest room. And if they wanted to discuss that I was available on Tuesdays and Fridays. He said I was being difficult. He sounded, underneath that, like he was embarrassed, which was the closest anyone came to telling the truth that month. Claude also asked, once, whether I'd noticed anything unusual about Grandma's finances. He asked it casually, while we were on the phone about something else. I said I hadn't noticed anything I could speak to yet. He went quiet for a moment. His hands, even through a phone call, went somehow still. I kept that note too. If you've been carrying someone through a hard season, and you're not sure the story is going to turn out right, subscribe so the rest of it finds you. It's worth staying. The envelope sat in my drawer until February, when Cecile had a small stroke, not debilitating but serious enough, and spent 11 days at Christ Hospital and came home slower and quieter. And 3 weeks after that she called me into the kitchen and said, "Dell, it's time to open it." Cecile died on a Thursday in March while I was at work. The hospice nurse called at 2:14 in the afternoon. I drove home in 15 minutes, ran every light on Madison Road, and she was already gone when I arrived. She was in the bed we'd set up together. There was a cedar waxwing on the fire escape outside the window. I don't know if that's the kind of thing you're supposed to mention, but I'm mentioning it. The letter in the envelope was 3 pages, handwritten, and it was not a personal letter. It was an explanation. Cecile had written it 6 months earlier in her careful cramped cursive, with a copy sent to Augustine Ferre in Columbus, who was a probate and estate attorney with 32 years of experience and a reputation, as he later told me, for thoroughness. In 2009, Cecile had inherited a property in Akron from her older sister. A commercial building, 2 storefronts and 3 apartments, which had been generating rental income for 14 years. My father had known about this property. He had been collecting the income, $2,200 per month, for 9 years, totaling $237,600, deposited into an account in his name, through a power of attorney document he had had Cecile sign in 2015, which she had signed because he told her it was for medical consent purposes. She had known for 2 years. She had not confronted him. She had documented everything and given it to Augustine Ferre, and written me a letter that said, in the second to last paragraph, "I am not asking you to be angry for me. I'm asking you to make sure the record is straight. That's all I ever needed. For the record to say what actually happened." The estate went into probate review in April. Augustine Ferre filed the paperwork. The property in Akron, which had appreciated to a current value of $380,000, was the core of Cecile's estate. The misappropriated funds were documented with bank statements going back to 2015. My father was notified by certified mail. He called me within the hour. I did not answer. The meeting with the estate attorney and both parties was scheduled for a Tuesday in May, at Augustine Ferre's office in Columbus. A quiet room with a round table and a window that faced east and let in good morning light. My mother was there. My father. Claude, who had flown in, which told me something. Brenda and Terrence, who had no legal role but came anyway, because that's what that side of the family does. Augustine Ferre. Me. I set the envelope on the table. The original letter, in Cecile's handwriting. I didn't open it. I just set it there. Augustine Ferre presented the documentation. Bank statements. The original power of attorney. The rental agreements. the $237,600 in transfers, the property valuation, the legal standard for fiduciary breach under Ohio estate law. My father said. She knew I was using that money for household expenses. She agreed to it. Augustine said. There is no written record of that agreement. My father's voice went loud. He said the whole thing was a setup, that I had manipulated an old woman, that Cecile had never understood finances, and that was why he had been managing them. My mother looked at the table. Claude looked at the window. His hands were flat on his knees and I watched him make a decision. Watched his shoulders lower about half an inch. And I knew he had chosen to be quiet, and I think he will carry that choice for a long time. Brenda started to cry. It was a performance. The crying arrived too quickly, and without the particular quality of genuine grief, and I noted it without judgment and moved on. Then my father looked at me and said the thing I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it. He said, "Your grandmother would have wanted this family to stay together." I picked up the envelope. I held it so the room could see her handwriting, my name, in cursive on the front. I said, "She told me to make sure the record says what actually happened. That's all she ever needed." Her words. Exactly. The room was very quiet. The estate was settled in full by August. The property in Akron was sold at $374,000, slightly under valuation due to market timing. The misappropriated funds were subject to restitution as a condition of avoiding civil litigation. Augustine Ferre gave my father 60 days to remit, and he did in 2 installments, the second of which arrived 3 days before the deadline. I could have pursued criminal charges. Augustine told me the case was strong enough. I called my father and told him I would not pursue it if he remitted in full and signed a document acknowledging the terms of the original power of attorney and its misuse. I gave him a week to consider it. He called back in 4 days. He said yes. He did not apologize. I did not require him to. My mother called a month later. She said she hoped someday I would understand the pressures they'd been under. I said I hope so too. I said she was welcome to call me on Tuesdays and Fridays. She hasn't yet, but the offer stands. Claude sent a card. Handwritten brief. He said he was sorry he hadn't said anything sooner. I wrote back and told him I understood. That part I meant. I received my portion of the estate in September. A direct deposit of $187,400, which is the net value after legal fees, and the equal distribution among surviving heirs. I have invested most of it. I kept $4,000 in a separate account, I think of as the kitchen account. I don't spend it on anything I can name. It just sits there with a label I wrote myself on a piece of tape on the folder. Cecile. I still make the pepper soup on Sundays. I get the Uta from the same vendor in Maryland. It comes in a small brown bag that smells, when you open it, like something between smoke and cloves and something else I don't have a word for. I measure it out the way she showed me, not by the spoon but by the handful, which is not a precise measurement and is exactly the right one. Last Sunday I made it correctly. I tasted it from the wooden spoon, standing alone in my kitchen in the early afternoon, and it was right. That's the one I thought. Now I'll always have it. Most inheritances are about money. A few are about something you can't deposit anywhere, something that travels in a wooden spoon and a handful of spice and a letter that says, "I just need the record to say what actually happened." If someone in your life is being quietly erased, call them this week. Not tomorrow. Today if you can. Tell them you see them clearly. If this story mattered to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below about someone in your life who carried their dignity quietly. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more stories waiting, and every one of them is true in the ways that count. I'll see you in the next one.